Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. All right, welcome to this week's podcast here with Jimmy Hinton
and his mom, Clara.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah, we partied without you. I did a podcast, and you shouldn't go back and listen to it because I was talking about you while you were away.
Jimmy, I have news for you. I already listened to it, so
busted.
Busted.
Well, you'll probably discipline me like Facebook did this week.
That's so funny. No.
Facebook disciplined me this week. I am in official Facebook timeout. So I don't know what I did, but apparently I'm naughty and Facebook is on to me. So there you have it, listeners.
I know it. I laughed when I saw that, Jimmy. Sorry.
That's all right. I think I'll make it. So we wanted to talk this week and really speak to just I think a really large community of people who are in this Never land. It's this place where they're desperate for help, and it seems like the louder you cry and the more you cry out for help, the more you're ignored and told to step down, to be quiet, to move on with your life. All these ready cliches that we have that we hurl at people. But we really want to speak to the families of abusers. We don't talk about that real often in our podcast, and it's a very real issue. And we also say that by proxy, we're talking about survivors as well, because whether a survivor is a family member of a predator, whether they are or not, I think they still are going to face some of these same issues that we face, this alienation and loneliness and misunderstanding and awkwardness and, all these frustrations that just compound.
I think the general public has a belief that once the predator is known and maybe legal action has taken place, that the families all fall back into place and everything's all good. Mm-hmm. That's not true. Actually, that's a beginning of a whole new series of happenings within the life of that family.
Yeah.
And we, ourselves included, had we not lived through this earthquake that follows, we wouldn't know about it either, because there hasn't been much light shed on that at all. In fact, I don't remember reading in all of the literature, all the books that I've read on predators and, how to report and all of that. I've never read something specific to the families. Mm-mm. How do you pick up the pieces and move on?
Well, and another thing that I think we really need to address today is for the majority of people who don't get convictions for the offenders. We were very blessed in that, it was pretty cut and dry.
Yes.
We went in, you and I made a report.
Yes.
We didn't have any idea what the outcome of that report was, but justice was served, and it was served swiftly, and it was served harshly, as it should have been.
Right. And we didn't have the agony of having to go to trial.
Right.
I've often thanked God over and over and over again that we didn't have to go through that, as many families do.
Yeah.
And then, like you're saying, the polar end of that is, what about when the abuse has been reported, the abuse is known, but there's not even a slap on the wrist? Mm-mm. How do families live through that? with it.
Well, I think we can use this to springboard into one of the main issues that families are going to face. And a lot of you listeners write us, and you share these stories, and they're heartbreaking. But this is where churches are probably the most abusive in this regard. But they come back when there's not a conviction, and they'll say things like, "Well, this person is innocent in the eyes of the law, and so." We feel like you're just slandering a perfectly good man's reputation for something that he may or may not have done way back in the past. That you're marring his good name. You're speaking out against this person. You're telling us to protect the flock against this guy's behaviors. But what are we protecting them from? This he's serving in the church, and he's an upright church member, and he's an upright citizen in the community, and you're the only complaint against this poor man, and you're marring his reputation, and you need to stand down."
My insides shake when I hear you using that as an example, and it goes back to that entire truth bomb that we had several weeks ago about believing those that speak up, because they're not going to fabricate a story and put themselves out to be in the open like that and become a target of all kinds of people. They're telling the truth.
Yeah.
And until someone believes them, it is horrible what they go through. It's like being abused over and over and over and over again, like opening that wound up again and again. Now, the issue becomes, why were they not prosecuted by law? There are a number of issues. You know that, and I know that. The law requires certain things in order for a person to be prosecuted. And sometimes, many times, these predators know just how to work the loopholes. They're smart. They know what they're doing. And they know how to get off, so to speak. So there are what I would call many violent predators on the loose. We were told ourselves that there was a local father who raped his young daughter 8 different times that the law knew about, but he got off on a legal loophole. He was allowed, not just allowed, he said
he had custody, didn't he? If I remember, if I'm thinking of the same story that you're telling me about,
because I was sick about it.
He got custody of the very children that he was abusing. So not only did he get off, he then filed for custody and got it.
He got it. Why does the law work that way? You and I can't change the law in a day, but we sure can work on it, because our laws are not I would say, not in proportion to the crime that's committed at all. We need to work on that. But
so I think, man, it's really frustrating for family members of predators, because especially those of you who were actually abused by them, the evil that these people are capable of. And to see them oohed and awed and goo-goo and gagaed over at church, and people radically defending them while looking at you and just basically flat out telling you, you're crazy, or you're slanderous, or you're a gossiper, you're guilty of gossip.
Or that happened in the past.
Yeah, it happened in the past.
You were a child.
That's not who he is now.
Right. He's a changed person. He loves God now. Try to convince a person who has been abused. Try to convince an adult who was abused over and over again as a child that action should just be treated as it was in the past.
Yeah.
The effects of those actions are lasting.
I think we can talk about some of the things like that these families experience, and then we'll share the flip side of that is, what can you guys as a community do about it? Because, we all know, all of us who are living it know it. I mean, we're preaching to the choir here, right. I think.
Mm-hmm. We are, yeah.
So everybody knows it, at least on their own personal level. We just want to validate and let you know this is not an isolated problem within your family. this is a universal problem. But we want to speak beyond the family members and speak to a wider community and say, there is a solution to this. And it's not necessarily a simple solution, but we need to start linking up as a community and banding together and rallying around these families. Because otherwise, the alternative is we're just going to have abuse that continues to spiral. And, from far beyond the abusive person, you have the abuse that goes on in the church with abusive leaders who cover up the abuse and protect the abusers. Mm-hmm. And it's just this horrible cycle. And we really want to see that break. And I'm not naive enough to say, oh, well, in X amount of years, there will not be any more abuse if we all stand up together. That's just, it's not going to happen. There's always going to be abuse.
Right. However,
but we can minimize the casualties big time.
Right. And the beauty of what is happening right now is we're seeing a snowball effect beginning.
Yeah.
It is really, really beginning. And I think, Jimmy, you and I are super excited about this. And I know many of you, as our listeners, understand what we're talking about. We are starting to hear that big voice, that collective voice, and it is changing things. That voice is unifying and changing things.
Well, why don't you talk about some of the aftermath that families experience, and I think this will really resonate with a lot of people.
I'm going to speak on a personal level about what I experienced within my family. And Jimmy, you can chime in as the son of a pedophile. But as the wife of a pedophile, when it became known to me and to my children what their dad and my then ex-husband had been doing, we were devastated. There's no other word to use. We were totally broken. We were shattered. We were left numb. We didn't know how to think. I personally had trouble just functioning in a normal 8-hour day. My mind was in a fog, and it is grief, grieving for what happened, grieving for the fact that I didn't know what had happened, grieving for my children who had now lost the father they thought they had. But on a more practical basis, when this all happened, I suddenly became mother and father to you children. I suddenly became the head of the household alone. It was as though everything came to a dead halt and then came to a screeching stop, but then the start button started immediately. There was no time to think. The mortgage was due. I had a job, but it wasn't adequate to take care of all the bills. I remember one of the first things that me and the girls experienced was I was sitting at work after work working on bills because I didn't want them to see me crying, and I was praying, begging God to somehow see to it that I would have money for the mortgage and my electric bill when I got a call from home from my youngest daughter saying, "Mom, something weird just happened. A man came up on the porch and he did something, and when he did, all of our lights went out." And God knows this is the honest truth. I had just been on the phone with the electric company begging them to give me one more week to pay the $35 that I owed them, and they would not. They said, your power will be shut off today, and that's what happened. It's a real deal when you don't have enough money to keep functioning. We lived, me and the girls, off of peanut butter, no jelly, peanut butter sandwiches for a long time. Why? Because we didn't have money. It was either make the mortgage and the electric or eat. We did not have enough money. If you know a family going through this, please check on them and bring them a bag of groceries. You have no idea what a bag of groceries would have meant to us at that time. We didn't know the resources that were available to us. And that's another thing. Help these families, make them aware of the resources. I didn't know I could have gotten help with my electric bill. I had no clue. I didn't know where to go. I did not know I could have gotten help with heat. We spent one entire winter without fuel. We lived with electric blankets only. Ask the girls today if they remember how that was. We froze. It was nasty bad, very nasty bad. And some people might be saying, well, why didn't you ask for help? When you have been beaten down for a long time emotionally, and for some people physically, for many physically, you're not in a position to ask. You simply are not. Who was I to ask anyway? I had not heard from one person from my church family. Not a single person came to visit. Not one single person brought a meal. That's sad.
Yep.
Not one and we had worshiped at that church all of our lives. Be there for the practical things. Loneliness, I can't even explain the loneliness that we encountered. And people forget that kids, young people are people too. They feel the impact of this. They feel the isolation. They feel people staring at them, whispering about them when they go to school. One of the first things I did was went to the school principal and superintendent and said, please watch out for my girls. Watch out for depression. Watch out for suicide. I was afraid. They did not want to face their peers because a pedophile is not a nice name, let alone people knowing that your dad was a pedophile. It was very shameful for them. They went through a lot of torment. And I'm just talking about them, Jimmy, right now. You can add what, from your perspective, but in our immediate home, all the other kids had left. It was me and the two younger girls living by ourselves at this point. Reputation, you feel like your whole, your life is out in public suddenly. And who wants that? I know I didn't.
Certainly not in that light.
Not in that light. No, it was embarrassing, shameful. And you just feel like your whole life has been marred, and somehow you feel responsible. At least I did. I shouldn't have, but you do. Normal responses to feel that way. You go through that whole grieving process of lost dreams. Your life is broken now, and your dreams for your life and for your children's lives are so different from what you had thought. You're left with going through the process of learning how to start over again. And that's tough. That is not easy under the best of circumstances. And these certainly were not the best of circumstances. Families who are touched by this, having a pedophile as a member of the family, the immediate family, or those who are survivors, go through a brokenness that is clear, what I call clear to the soul. Your faith is affected. Your relationships in all of life are affected. The joy is snuffed right out of your life. And Jimmy and I were talking. I had written something yesterday to Jimmy, and then we were talking today prior to this podcast. And he said, well, what's the one thing you would say? I would say for people to be normal around you, treat you normal, invite you out to have a little normal family time, because you're not having that right now. Extend an invitation for a meal. I think the girls and I would have loved that. Instead, it was like we were shunned. We were excluded.
I think that's one of the really difficult things, because for us, again, it was in the newspaper, so it was black and white. I mean, it was in writing, and you couldn't get around that.
It was
for other news, and people were still really awkward and avoided us like the plague.
Yeah.
What about people who, there's, for safety reasons or a host of other reasons, they can't talk about it, or they're just not at a place where they're able to talk about it, and so people in the community, people who kind of need to support them, they may not even have a clue that anything's wrong in the first place.
Right.
And and I'm not saying you need to tell people if your life is shattered and falling apart. I'm just saying this is amplified for people who cannot talk about it.
It's terrible. It really
and
is.
so for what bit of loneliness and alienation that we felt,
it's magnified.
It's magnified
1,000. Yes.
Big time
It is.
for other people.
Terrible.
And, I don't know. I know from my experience, it was a little bit different for me, I think, because, I was leading a church where some of that abuse took place. And so the elephant was already in the room, and I happened to be the one who was shining a spotlight on the elephant.
Right.
So I never ran or shrunk back from the elephant that was in the room. That doesn't mean that I didn't want to,
Right.
But
Absolutely.
From where I was coming from, at first we didn't have a clue who any of the victims were.
Right.
And so I had to just brace for the worst and just assume that a whole bunch of the young faces that were in the audience, who I was looking at on Sunday, were some of his victims. And so when I made an announcement to the church, I shined a big old spotlight right on the elephant. And I said, my dad, he's been arrested this weekend, and this is what he was arrested for. Here's what the allegations are. We know that some of those allegations are true, for sure. And we don't know how many victims or who the victims are. And so I had pled with my church, and I said, please don't talk about this behind my family's back. Do not do that to my family. If you have any questions about the safety of your child or whether your child was a victim, speak to me directly or speak to the detective. Officer Beckner was the one who had handled the case. Speak to her directly. So, I was crystal clear about that.
Right.
And so for me, it was a little bit different because people still didn't talk about it. It was still really awkward. Mm-hmm. But at least I wasn't afraid of just addressing the elephant that's in the room. Other people can't. Right. And so it becomes excruciatingly awkward, painful, hurtful, lonely. All those emotions are just wrapped up into one.
It's just a ball
terrible.
Of mess. That's all.
Yeah.
It's a ball of mess for everyone. But to not face the elephant in the room is for those around the family members that are suffering, that when you know about it, is just adding hurt to hurt.
Yeah.
I guess that's the only thing I could say. And, you might say, well, I wouldn't know what to say to a family. You don't really have to say anything. Just be a friend. Mm-hmm. And that's what Jimmy and I were talking about. Be a friend. Just say, hey, do you guys want to come out and hang out for a while?
See, I liked when you were talking about that, before we started recording here, Mom was talking about friends of hers, and it was a very small number. And unfortunately, it wasn't anybody in the faith community.
But that's okay. I mean, they were still, got the job done.
But still, what they did was they normalized you. They normalized your life. And so it wasn't, oh, honey, we just feel so bad. And, they didn't do that. They just said, hey, we're going out to dinner. You're coming with us.
Yep. They wouldn't take no for an answer. I tried to say, no, I'm too tired, or I don't feel up to it, or I have too much work. They said, no, you have an hour. Mm-hmm. You can come out. We'll come pick you up if we have to, but we're going and you're coming too. And just that hour of normal conversation made me feel so much more normal. Yeah. What a blessing that was. Yeah. Just treating me as their friend. We didn't talk about anything out of the ordinary. Yeah. It was just fun.
And I think that's really important for the people beyond the survivor community. Man, just treat people normal and
Like
you don't have to bring it up.
No.
You don't.
I wouldn't have wanted that.
Yeah.
I personally, I would
A lot
not
of people
have wanted
don't.
it. No, I didn't need to talk about it, but I needed to have friends.
Yeah.
I needed to know that they were still walking with me, so to speak. I needed to know that I was okay. And I think that's what every survivor of abuse craves and needs to know, that, hey, we accept you. We love you. You are our friend. We're here. Yeah. And that can be, that message can be given without speaking words. You don't have to have a speech at all.
Yeah. I think just going out and doing fun activities. And again, they may not feel like doing something fun.
But I loved how my friends said, look, we're going to come get you if you don't come.
Yeah.
We're going to see to it that you come out. It won't hurt you. And they were right. I will never forget that. I will always be thankful for that blessing.
And I think, some of the other things you had mentioned, just going out and getting groceries and dropping a bag or 10 off at somebody's house. Well, I think probably one of the worst things that we can do, and I'm guilty of this is why I'm laughing, is I still have to stop myself because I'm so programmed to do it, where I say, if you need anything, let me know. No. I try really hard not to do that anymore because, well, I mean, for all the reasons that you mentioned before, you're not at a place to ask for help.
No, you're not.
And not in a million years would you even have the energy to scrape yourself off the couch to ask somebody for help.
I want to share one story, and it probably in my lifetime, I will never get over this story. It has since empowered me, but I did ask for help 2 different times when all of this happened. Number one, I went to our bank, and I asked the president of the bank for help. I was crying, and it took me days to get the courage to go. I typed up a letter and I went to him. I was trembling. I was literally sick in my stomach, had to throw up and all that good stuff. When I went there, he was such a fine man. He definitely was a gift from God. He said, look, stop right there. He said, I know you have a job. I know you will pay your bills. I trust you. You live in that house. You take care of those 2 girls that are with you. And he said, you get out of here and you know that I'm behind you. That was number one. That was fantastic. And I can tell you this, I have not ever been late on that mortgage payment, ever. And that man empowered me. I hope he's listening to this podcast because and I've told him since how much he empowered me. But number 2, I needed fuel oil that winter, for the first winter that I was head of the household, so to speak, for me and the girls. I did go to the president of the company, local company here. I knew the family, and asked him to give me $400 worth of fuel oil on credit. And his response to me was something that I'll never forget. He just sat back in his fancy leather chair and he said, let me ask you something. When you go buy groceries, do you buy them on credit? He said, do you go to the supermarket and ask them to give you food on credit? He said, no. He said, when you have money to pay me, I'll give you your fuel oil. And I remember thinking, I will never ask anyone. I will never put myself through this ever again. I managed to get out to my car without crying, but as I drove off, I sobbed and sobbed. And I have never asked since then. I have never asked since then. We went without fuel oil that winter. We used electric blankets. It was horrible. But since then, that very scene has empowered me to help others know how to help people.
Yeah, and I think there's a very big difference between the statement, if you need anything, let me know, and this question, and this is one that I do try to ask often, what specifically do you need? That's
perfect. That's
because
perfect.
That gives people, and some people are very hesitant, and they'll say,
Yep.
Well, and that it's that hesitation that tells me
that
there's a list
something.
of things.
Yeah.
There's something that they need.
Right.
And so I don't ever push it. You know, I'm
Right.
careful not to cross
Right.
boundaries, but you know, I'll say, I noticed that you hesitated. There's got to be something. And I don't care what it is, and maybe it's something that we can take care of. Maybe
Right.
it's not.
And maybe not, but you could guide that person to
But
help,
if we don't
to
know
the resource.
what your needs
Right.
are,
No.
we can't help you. At least we can't help you in the best way possible.
Right. Now, I know I lost immediately 40-something pounds. People said, oh my gosh, what's happening? You look horrible. I didn't have food to eat. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't eating. The girls' weight dropped down. Just a little common sense would say, okay, something's going on there. You know, so we need to be aware. We need to be a friend, and we need to do the practical, address the practical always. If you don't know, a gift card is always great.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be $500. $20 is really good. A couple Starbucks drinks. And I'm being very, very practical in this podcast because often we forget the practical.
All right. So we want to leave on a high note. And, you know, I think we've given some decent suggestions. I'm sure there are lots more. So if you guys are listening and you think of other ones, go to our websites or go to our social media
shoot
sites.
us an email.
Do it on Twitter.
Absolutely.
I'll be honest, our email boxes tend to get filled up pretty quickly. If you expect a response, it doesn't always happen.
It takes
so I think social
time,
media
yes.
is just it's a better avenue, and you can kind of follow our posts, and I think you'll get more interaction on social media than you will through email.
Private email.
So, you know, there's your silent grief, I think is a really good avenue on social media. They can follow you. What's your handle on Twitter?
Just Clara Hinton.
And then mine is, I think, Jimmy Hinton 12.
And
I'm still mad that there were 12 who came.
Everything on there.
I'm still mad about that. There are 12 Jimmy Hinton, or 11 who came before me. But mine, my Twitter handle is Jimmy Hinton 12. Nothing that fancy. And then I have my Facebook page. I've been having a growing number of people friend me on Facebook. I don't do a whole lot with my personal Facebook page. Go to jimmyhinton.org. You'll find a lot more activity on that Facebook page than you will my private Facebook page. I think people friend me not knowing that I have a separate Facebook page that's more specific to dialogue on abuse.
Right.
So anyway, shoot us your ideas and let us know some things that would help you kind of work through healing, because we really don't have all the answers.
Actually,
believe
we
it or
don't.
not.
And Jimmy and
we
I have
like
been
to dialogue with people.
Right. We've been discussing putting together something to share with people for a way to better help families who are living through this aftermath of abuse.
Yeah. So, and well, we talk about several things, and you know, one of the things that I mentioned last week in the podcast episode 18 is this idea of like having a safe church that's an online community for the outcasts. And that's not my terminology. That is a biblical term. Jesus uses that term to describe these people who've been cast aside, or they've been cast out by the religious community. And there are so many, just millions of people. That's an estimate, but I really do think that's an accurate estimate.
Sure, it's accurate. Yes.
And I think there are millions of people who are still believers, and they just don't fit anywhere. They've been cast aside. They've not been believed. They've been labeled. They've been kicked out of the church, and they don't really have anywhere to safely worship and to safely learn and grow and mature in their faith. And so I'm floating this idea of doing an online safe church for this community of outcasts, where you're not going to be preached at, you're not going to be lectured, you're not going to be told that you're unforgiving or that you're bitter. All this garbage that you hear at church, you're not going to get it here. So I'm really seriously thinking about starting that soon, possibly as early as beginning in August,
and I
in a couple
told Jimmy,
weeks.
I just love and appreciate this idea because there are seriously millions of hurting people out there from all types of abuse, not just sexual abuse, but emotional abuse and all kinds of pain and abuse that it seems like they've left God. They have not. They just haven't found that place in a physical house of worship. Mm-hmm. And I think, Jimmy, you have the ability to minister and to teach that group how to become better at sharing our love with each other and at worshiping our God.
And to know that God still loves you and validates you.
Absolutely.
And it's exactly and that was my message last week. It was the castaways who Jesus really went after.
Right.
He intentionally sought out people who have been abandoned by the religious community. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we're going to end with our truth bomb. And our truth bomb is this. We mentioned it before. Mom mentioned it. Just be normal. When you find people who are in front of you who are hurting, help them to feel normal again. Just invite them. Be inclusive. Invite them into your home. Invite them to dinner. Invite them when you go out to the movies and you're just having a family night or a fun night or whatever it is.
Simplified, be a friend.
Yeah, be a friend to them. Well, thank you again for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you next round. Thanks a lot, listeners. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.